Disowned over false, essay accusations. Now my family needs my help for emergency surgery. This story has been weighing on me for years, and recent events have brought everything crashing back. I'm Carlos 31M. The story starts back when I was 18, just finishing high school. My family was big, and I was known for babysitting my younger cousins when their parents were busy. My Uncle Juan and his wife had 3 kids, Marco, 6, Lily, 9, and the eldest, Maria, 15. Maria was usually supposed to look after her siblings, but she often bailed, leaving me to handle the responsibility. One night, I was babysitting all 3. Everything seemed normal, but I noticed Maria acting strange. She kept texting me weird, flirty messages, and I immediately told her to stop. She was my cousin, and even though we were close in age, I wanted absolutely no part of that. I thought I'd shut it down, but looking back, I realize now that rejecting her was the biggest mistake I could have made. A few days later, my Uncle Juan and my older cousin Fernando showed up at our house. I could tell they were furious, but I had no idea why. In a flash, Fernando grabbed my shirt, dragged me onto the front lawn, and started beating me. I had no idea what was happening. All I knew was that I was being pummeled for reasons I didn't understand. I kept begging him to stop. I was helpless. My dad tried intervening, but my uncle stopped him. But he wouldn't let up until Juan finally pulled him off of me. The police were called, and once things calmed down, I learned why they were so angry. Maria had accused me of assaulting her. It felt like the ground had disappeared beneath my feet. I was dumbfounded, too shocked to speak. In an instant, everything I knew had turned upside down. The police took both me and Fernando away that night. He was charged with assault, but I was hit with something much worse, a SA charge. Fernando was released after a few days, as I decided not to press charges against him. I thought if I let it go, my family might do the same for me, believing it was all a misunderstanding. But I was wrong. Maria's accusations stuck, and my uncle pushed for legal action, convinced I was guilty. My parents stood by me. They knew I'd never do something like this. But everyone else in the family turned their backs. Suddenly, I was the monster, and my family wanted nothing to do with me. Even my extended family wouldn't speak to me, casting us out like pariahs. I'd never felt more alone or betrayed in my life. I was terrified as my case made its way to court, and it seemed like my life was on the brink of destruction. But thanks to my lawyer, Glenn, the case was eventually dismissed due to lack of evidence. Maria had no proof, and her story had holes. Even so, the damage was done. My family never apologized, and Maria faced no consequences for her lie. I was left shattered, my reputation and my family ties completely destroyed. It took years to recover from that experience. My parents were the only ones who stuck by me, and we had to rebuild our lives from scratch without the family support we once relied on. I was angry, humiliated, and heartbroken, but I was determined not to let that moment define me. After the case was dismissed, Glenn became a mentor to me. He'd seen firsthand what I went through and offered me a job at his small law firm. I threw myself into work, determined to build a career where I could make a difference for others who might face similar false accusations. It became my way of channeling the anger and betrayal I felt. The work was rewarding, and over time our firm grew, becoming increasingly successful. My income rose, and I started sending money to my parents as a thank you for standing by me. I also made other changes in my life. I began working out and even took self-defense classes. I didn't want to be vulnerable again, whether physically or emotionally. I wanted to make sure no one could ever put me in that position again. As the years went by, I found a new circle of friends and support. I was in a much better place, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me. But my family remained absent from my life. I never heard a word from my uncle Fernando or Maria, not even an apology. They'd gone on as if nothing had happened while I was left to pick up the pieces. Fast forward to a few days ago. I was at work when my phone rang. It was a call from Marco, my youngest cousin. Hearing his voice after all these years brought back a flood of memories. I wasn't sure what to expect, but then he told me why he was calling. My Uncle Juan was in dire need of a heart bypass surgery due to a severe heart condition. They'd recently found out about the financial support I'd been sending to my parents and thought I might be able to help cover the surgery costs. Marco sounded desperate, explaining that they'd exhausted their savings and had nowhere else to turn. They needed a substantial amount, more than they could afford, and he asked if I could step in to save his father's life. It took everything in me to stay calm as I listened. My mind was racing. After everything they'd put me through, they now wanted my help. They needed me. The very person they'd cast aside and treated like a monster to save my uncle's life. I told Marco I'd think about it, but honestly, I'm torn. Now I'm sitting here asking myself if I should help the family that disowned me. On one hand, I've built a life of integrity, a life where I try to help others who need it. I've worked hard to overcome the hurt and betrayal they inflicted on me. But on the other hand, I can't forget how they treated me. They believed Maria's lies without question, ruined my reputation, and left my parents and me to fend for ourselves. They never once apologized or tried to make amends. Part of me feels like I should walk away. They made their choice back then, and now they're facing the consequences of abandoning us. But then there's Marco, who was only a child when all this happened. He didn't do anything wrong, and he's reaching out because he's desperate to save his father's life. Is it fair to punish him for the actions of his family? I keep going back and forth, unable to settle on an answer. If I do help, it would go against every instinct I have, every part of me that says they don't deserve it. But if I don't, would I be able to live with myself, knowing I had the power to save a life and chose not to? I feel trapped in this moral dilemma, and I don't know which path is right. Reddit, I'm turning to you for advice. Should I step in and help pay for my uncle's surgery despite everything they did to me and my family? Or should I let them face the consequences of their actions, even if it means someone could lose their life? Any thoughts would be appreciated. I just don't know what to do. Thanks to everyone who responded to my original post. I thought about what you all said, weighed my options, and in the end I decided not to help. It wasn't an easy choice, but after years of betrayal and rejection, I felt it was time for my family to deal with the consequences of their actions. When I told Marco I wouldn't be giving any money for the surgery, he was stunned. He started arguing and begging, pleading with me to reconsider. He promised he'd find a way to pay me back, said he'd do whatever it took, but honestly, I didn't care. This wasn't about the money for me. It was about the pain and humiliation they put me through. All for a lie that shattered my life. Marco, desperate, offered to have Maria tell everyone the truth, that she'd made up the accusation all those years ago. He swore she'd apologize publicly to clear my name. But after everything, I told him it was too little, too late. I didn't even know if I'd feel anything if she confessed now. Years of being outcasted and viewed as a monster had hardened me. Hearing her admit the truth wouldn't erase the scars left behind, or bring back the years I'd spent feeling abandoned and broken. Marco continued to beg, saying they needed this for his dad's surgery, that his father could die without my help. But I stayed firm. I don't know if that makes me heartless, but I can't overlook what they put me through. Maybe that makes me the bad guy now, but I just couldn't bring myself to care enough to help. Thanks to everyone who gave me advice. I know my choice isn't what everyone would have done, but for once it feels like I finally took control of my life and stood up for myself. I wish Marco well, but I'm done being a part of their lives.